Hello, my name is Nalani Brown. I'm the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones, reading to you A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. We are on book the second, chapter 13, A Subject Nothing. Chapter 13, A Subject Nothing Delicate. If Sidney Carton ever shone, it was probably not at Dr. Manette's house. For a whole year, he visited the house frequently, but he always seemed pensive and sad. When he proposed to, he spoke well, but his indifference to everything surrounded him in a cloud that rarely pierced the light of his intelligence. However, he felt a special attraction for the streets that surrounded the house, and even for the stones of the street. And many nights, when the wine had not managed to make him happy, he would go around it, and sometimes the dawn would surprise him, and even the first light of the sun going around that place. Lately, his abandoned bed, he missed him more often. And on some occasions, after lying down on it, he would get up in a few minutes and go prowling around Soho. One day in August, after Stryver notified his jackal that he had thought better of it and was no longer getting married, Sidney was prowling the place when suddenly he was buoyed by a resolution and headed straight for the doctor's house. He climbed the ladder and found Lucy busy with her chores. The young woman had never felt comfortable in Carton's company and therefore received him with some embarrassment, but he sat down at the table close to her. The young woman looked at Carton's face after changing a few unimportant words and saw that there was a great change in him. "I'm afraid you're not in good health, Mr. Carton," she said. "Do not. The life that I lead, Miss Manette, is not the most suitable for good health. But what can you expect from libertines? And isn't it a pity, I beg you, forgive me, not to lead a better life? God knows it's a shame. So why don't you change your way of life?" The young woman looked at him fondly and was surprised and saddened to see that Carton's eyes were wet with tears. And, with an uncertain voice, he answered, "It's too late. I can't be better than I am. On the contrary, I will sink further and become even worse." Carton leaned an elbow on the table and his head in his hand, and then said, "I beg you to forgive me, Miss Manette. I was moved before telling you what I wish. Do you want to hear me? I'm willing to do anything beneficial for you, and if I managed to make you happier, I would feel great joy. God bless you for your sweet compassion." He uncovered the face and began to speak more firmly. "Do not be afraid to listen to me or be disturbed by my words, whatever they are. I am like a man who died very young. My whole life has been a failure." "No, Mr. Carton. I'm sure the best of you could still develop. I am sure you could be much more worthy of yourself." "Decide worthy of you, Miss Manette. And although I am sure otherwise, I will never forget your kind words." The young woman was pale and trembling, and he continued, saying, "If it had been possible, Miss Manette, that you would reciprocate the love of the man before you, this degraded, failed, drunk, and completely useless man, he would have realized that, despite his happiness, he would not have brought you more than that misery, sadness, and repentance, as it would have made you unhappy, and dragged you down in its fall. I know perfectly that your heart cannot feel any tenderness toward me, and not only do I not ask for it, but I thank heaven that it is not. Couldn't I save you despite that, Mr. Carton? Could it not make you inclined to follow a better path? Can't I reward your trust like this?" She said after some hesitation, and very moved. He shook his head negatively. "It's not possible. If you still deign to listen to me, you will see that would be impossible. I only want to tell you that you have been the last dream of my soul, even in my degradation. Your image, that of your father, as well as his home, have awakened feelings in me that I believed were missing. Since I met you, I'm troubled by remorse that I did not believe I was alive, and I have heard voices, which I believed were silent, that incite me to regain my spirits. I have had vague ideas of trying again, of starting life again, of throwing laziness and sensuality out of me and returning to the abandoned struggle. But all this is nothing more than a dream, which leads to nothing and leaves the sleeping person where he was. Although I wish to tell you that these dreams were inspired by you." "And there's nothing left of them? Oh, Mr. Carton, think again of all that. Try again." "No, Miss Minette, I know myself well, and I know I don't deserve anything. But I still feel the weakness of wanting you to know, with that force you lit some sparks in me, even though I was nothing but ash. Sparks that turned into fire, although it leads to nothing, because it burns uselessly. Since I have the misfortune to have made you more miserable than you were before you met me." "Don't say that, Miss Minette, because if possible, only you could have done the miracle. You are not the cause of my greater misfortune. Since I have been the cause of your current state of mind, could I not use my influence in your favor? Am I not empowered to do you some good, Mr. Carton?" "The best I can do now, Miss Minette. I've come here to do it. Let the memory carry me in my disorderly and lost life that you have been the last person in the world to whom I have opened my heart, and that there is still something in it that you can deplore and feel sorry for. Although I still believe with all my soul that you are capable of better things." "It's useless, Miss Minette. I've proven myself, and I know myself better. I know I am sorry for you, and for that I am going to finish. What will you promise me that when I remember this day, I can be sure that the last confidence of my life rests in your pure and innocent chest, and that it is there alone and will not be shared by anyone? If this is to be of any consolation, I promise you. Will you not make known, or the person most dear to you, and who you have yet to meet?" "Mr. Carton," the young woman replied excitedly, "this secret is yours and not mine, and I promise to respect it." "Thank you. God bless you." He brought the young woman's hands to his lips and headed for the door. "Have no fear, Miss Minette, that I will never allude to this conversation, not even a word. I will never refer to her again, and if she were already dead, you couldn't be more sure of it. And at the time of my death, I will keep as a sacred memory. I remember that I will bless with all my soul that my last confession was made to you, and that my name, my faults and my miseries are kept in your heart. And God forbid you are happy in another way." Carton was then so different from what it had always seemed, and so sad to think how much it could have been, and how many excellent qualities it had squandered and was still wasting, that Lucy Minette began to cry for him, while Carton looked at her. "Console yourself," he said. "I don't deserve your pity. In an hour or two, the bad companions and the pernicious habits that I despise will again take hold of me and make me even less worthy of those sheer tears. But inside me, I will always be for you what I am now. Promise me that you will believe that of me. I promise you. I have to ask you for the last favor. For you and for those who are dear to you, I would be able to do anything. If my life were better and there was some capacity for sacrifice in it, I would gladly sacrifice myself for you or those who were dear to you. Time will come, and it will not be long, in which you will be bound to this home, which you love so much, other stronger and more tender ties. And then, Miss Manette, when you see the happy looks of a father fixed in your eyes, or that your beauty is reborn brighter at your feet, think that there is a man who would give his life to preserve that of a being who was dear to you. He said goodbye, and God bless you, and left the room. Chapter 14, The Honest Craftsman. Every day, many and varied objects were offered to the gaze of Mr. Jeremias Redor, and his ugly son of Fleet Street, while the father was sitting on his stool. With a straw hat in his mouth, Mr. Jeremias observed the human current that went in two directions, hoping that the opportunity to carry out a business would present itself. Some part of Mr. Jeremias' income was earned by serving as a pilot for some shy women, many of them in the second half of their life, to cross the street from one part to another. But despite the fact that those relationships were necessarily short-lived, Mr. Rodor never failed to express his ardent desire to have the honor of drinking to the health of the women he accompanied. And the gifts he received for his benevolent purpose constituted a part of his income, as has already been said. There was one day, Mr. Rode heard one of the most unpleasant moments, because hardly any women passed by, and his business took such a bad turn that he came to suspect that his wife was praying against him, as was her custom. When he was struck by numerous crowds following on Fleet Street to the west, looking in that direction, Mr. Rodor realized that it was a funeral procession, and that, apparently, spirits were excited against him, as many protests were heard. "A burial, little one," he said to his offspring. "Live!" exclaimed the young rodent. The boy gave this "alive" a mysterious meaning, but this made the author of his days so bad that he gave his son a pappery tap on the ear. "What's that?" exclaimed the father. "Why don't you give alive?" "Don't let him hear you again, because otherwise we'll see each other." "I didn't do anything wrong," the young rodent protested, rubbing his cheek. "You better shut up. Get on that stool and watch." The son obeyed as the crowd approached, whistling and shouting around a bad coffin in a rather dilapidated hearse, followed by a single plaintiff dressed in the costume of a trade, nothing new, which was considered indispensable for the dignity of his position. Anyway, this position did not seem to please him, as the crowd surrounded him, shouting, mocking him, making faces, and exclaiming at every moment, "Spies! Spies die!" and other compliments like that, although impossible to repeat. Funerals had always had a special appeal to Mr. Rodent, who seemed to get excited when one of the funeral party passed at the Telson Bank. And it as natural as funeral with such strange accompaniment as the one, it aroused his interest even more, and he asked the first man who passed by, "What happened?" "I don't know," replied the passerby. "Spies. Spies die." Since they had not answered what he wanted, Mr. Rodent asked another man who the dead man was. "I don't know," he answered, and immediately he put his hands to his mouth as a horn and shouted with the greatest enthusiasm, "Spies! Spies die!" Finally, a person better informed about the case came by, and through her, Mr. Rodor found out that the funeral was of a certain Roger Cly. "Was he a spy?" asked Mr. Rodent. "Yes, from the Old Bailey," his informant replied. "Spies! The Old Bailey spies die." "Yes, it's true," Mr. Rodent exclaimed, remembering the trial he attended. "I saw him once." "Has died?" "Oh, he couldn't be more dead. Get him out of here. Spies out. Get him out of the car." The idea was so much to the taste of the crowd that they immediately fell in love with it, and first of all set about stopping the vehicle. They seized the plaintiff, but he was so clever that he slipped from the hands that held him and fled down a nearby alley, although not without abandoning on the way the hat with its funeral gauze, the mantle, the white handkerchief, and other symbolic tears. These trophies were immediately destroyed by the crowd, while the shoekeepers hastily closed the doors of their establishments, because in those days the crowd did not stand in bars, and it was to be feared. He was about to remove the coffin from the car when another genius put forward the idea of leaving it there, as it was, and driving it to its destination amidst general rejoicing. Timely advice was much needed, and it was admirably received. About 8 individuals mounted in the car, including Mr. Rodent, with more modesty, hid his head not to be observed from the bank. The employees of the funeral home protested against this modification in the ceremonies. But since the river was only a short distance away from some voices, and some voices were already making observations about the efficacy of a cold bath to drown certain protests, they did not persist in them. They modified procession, resumed its march, led by a chimney sweep, advised by a coachman by trade, and assisted by a pastry chef. But it was so considered very appropriate that a Hungarian with his bear, a very popular type in those days, should appear in the procession, and the poor bear, who was black and shiny, harmonized perfectly with the procession in which he took part. Thus, drinking beer, smoking, shouting and mocking in any way, the disorderly procession continued the march, recruiting more people as it went and closing all the shops that it came across. His destination was the Church of San Pancracio, located in the middle of the field, and the procession arrived there in due time. The burial was made in the cemetery, although surrounding the ceremony with completely carpicious practices, with the greatest satisfaction of the numerous procession. Once Roger Cly's body was buried, the crowd was forced to seek some other distraction. He came up with the idea of accusing passers-by of Old Bailey spies and taking revenge on them. He hunting harmless 20 people who had never been even approached the Old Bailey, and made them subject to insults and abuse. Then the transition from breaking window panes and looting shops was a natural fit. Finally, after a few hours, when some country houses had already been looted and numerous iron gates destroyed that provided weapons to the most exalted spirits, the rumor began to circulate that the guards were coming. Then the crowd began to dissolve, although perhaps the guards did not even think of approaching that place. Mr. Rodor did not take part in the final amusements, but stayed in the cemetery, talking to the funeral home employees. This place had a certain melancholy charm to him. He got himself a pipe from a neighboring tavern, and while he smoked, he stared at the gate and made some considerations. "Jeremiah," he said to himself, "that day you saw poor Roger Cly with your eyes, he was a robust young man. And oh, now." After smoking the pipe and reflecting a bit more, he turned to be back at the bank before closing time. And, whether it was because he was deeply moved by his meditations on death, because his health was not doing well, or because he wished to bestow an honor on his medical advisor, The truth is that he went to visit a distinguished surgeon on his way back. Young Jeremiah replaced his father during his absence, and upon seeing him, he realized that he had nothing to do. The bank closed its doors, the old clerks came out, the customary guard was set up, and Mr. Rodor and his son went home for tea. That is the end of the story, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. My name is Nalani Brown. I'm the philanthropy coordinator at Frank Toby Jones. Thank you so much for listening. Stay healthy and stay safe.